Tales from Juthos, Part 5.
So your captain's plan is what, exactly?
Rastin was struggling to believe what he was hearing. Since they had arrived at the harbour and discovered they weren't going to be leaving the Aetherling in as prompt a manner as they had expected, the gnome's curiosity had gone into overdrive. Further, now they had been counted by the dockmaster, they had the added security of knowing they would not be thrown overboard by the smugglers in some accident on the high seas. If they wanted you dead, they would have taken us into those carts and sunk you after you left the harbour.
The captain knows what he's doing, spoke the crewman.
Since Krulak had left the ship, his subordinates had grown more talkative too. This did nothing to ease Rastin's mind. It probably meant they were nervous.
He's got friends waiting for him in the city. He'll probably lay low with them for a while.
They were sat below deck around a cargo crate, which was serving as a makeshift table for the crewmen to play a game of cards. However, interest in the game had long since faded, since they had received word that Krulak had abducted the dockmaster's pet. From what Rastin had put together, the captain had agreed to play nice with the dockmaster in order to get her to agree to allow him and his crew to resupply from their harbour, a show of good faith, after their departure had been unexpectedly delayed. Whilst guards were still positioned around the boarding plank, this had at least afforded the captain the opportunity to further his plans, whatever they were. However, Rastin had no doubt that those same guards were under instruction to keep close track of the numbers boarding and alighting the ship. There was simply no way that the dockmaster wouldn't have been aware that he was working on something. In fact, now that he thought about it, surely it would have been easier just to deny the captain her good grace. With the amount of men she had at her disposal within this port, Ezradis held all the cards, after all. None of this made any sense. Rastin worked his fingers into his temple in frustration.
So your instructions are what, exactly? Wait until every guard in the port storms that gangplank and then threaten to cut our throats. Are you insane? You can't honestly expect to leave this place alive.
The man across the table didn't say anything. He just thumbed the handle of the axe he had resting at his side.
There's something else, isn't there?
Nimera broke the silence between the two men. She was standing at Rastin's side, calculating eyes boring into the faces of the crewmen. You people are criminals. You wouldn't be risking your lives working for Mentis unless there was something else going on. On the other side of the chamber, another crewman called out from his hammock.
Oi! You two pipe down. That's enough with the questions.
The defiant red-haired gnome swiveled her head around to address this new voice.
So what is it then? What are you people looking for here? Why did you take this job? Isn't there enough coin to be earned exploiting refugees without getting involved with His Majesty?
Rastin was taken aback by her forcefulness.
Listen here, you little... No, you listen here! I've had enough of this. All I need to do is scream and the guards will come running, and then what will you do? What is Silden after?
The cabin descended into silence. Rastin was just staring at his former apprentice, the other gnomes in the room shrinking away in case of conflict. He remembered the first time she had set foot in his workshop. Nervous, bright, eager to prove herself. He remembered her graduation, the smile on her face and the excitement that seemed to radiate out of her. He remembered coming to her late that night as she toiled away on one of their combat automatons. She had known it wouldn't be ready in time, that it was hopeless. The Union's armies had been set to be upon them within the week. He remembered standing a while in the doorway, listening to her crying, unable to bring himself to approach, clutching the crumpled summons within his hands as he steeled himself to tell her that he, her tutor, had given up. He should have had a better backup than this. He was supposed to be clever. He looked on at this unfamiliar girl, bags under her eyes and no trace of the smile she had always worn. He wondered the extent of the price she would pay for his failure. Rastin watched as the large, brutish smuggler climbed down from his hammock, anger flaring in his eyes and in the tightness of his jaw. He would not fail his student again. "Don't you think it would have been easier for Ezradis to hide us under her own guards? You could be far at sea by now. The only reason she would insist that we stay upon this vessel is so that you people felt like you had a bargaining tool. She was waiting to see what you would do, and your captain has played right into her hands. So what's it going to be? Are you ready to die because of your captain's blunder?" Rastin was summoning as much strength as he could to back his words. He wasn't used to this. He liked to plan, calculate. He was an engineer, for Nadtek's sake. He wasn't used to this sort of gamble. For the briefest moment, Nimra's eyes met his own. "Whatever your motives are, we are not ungrateful for the risks you took getting us out of Elosphia. If you let us know what's going on, we could help you." His voice was gaining in confidence, but none of this made any sense. The crew looked amongst each other, unsure of what to do or what to say. There were 7 of them in the room, on top of the 9 gnomes who were stowed away here. Since they had entered port, the crew had barely had time to sleep, the main deck being crewed by as many armed men as possible at all times. Eventually, one of them spoke. "There are certain things, Master Gnome, that are more important than money and a smuggler's life." It was the dwarven man who had slept above Rastin on the voyage. "Those covered carts that left without you. The captain reckons those were some sort of decoy. That's why your kin are still on this ship, you see, and why we fancies that dockmaster isn't quite in the control that she thinks she is." The other crewmen looked to the disgruntled and tired-looking man with noises of protest. Clearly the dwarf was letting on more than they had been instructed to. You could stuck it. If it keeps them quiet, then it's all the same to me. The only people who knew that we'd been sent to pick up you lot were the king, his messengers, and Gren's port authority. Seeing us someone knew enough to send their beast to pick us off as we were navigating around Losfeld, that means one of them few has turned traitor." Nimra was nodding. She furrowed her brow for a moment, then slowly spoke as she considered this new information. "So Sildon is hoping to find out who amongst Ezradis's men is working with devils? Why? What does he stand to gain from helping that woman?" The dwarf let out a wistful sigh. "The Aetheling is bound for waters through which we cannot allow ourselves to be followed. We need to know whether those devils had their designs set on us or you. Initially, we thought the dockmaster was sitting too pretty to risk turning against her king, but that pet of hers made the captain wonder otherwise. If the captain can talk to the pet and rule out Ezradis's involvement, he'll be better set to approach her and strike a deal on solving this devil problem." As the dwarf spoke, the reaction amongst the crew was not what Rastin would have expected. A goblin, which had been endlessly scratching on a support pillar, finally stopped. A human looked down into his tankard and smiled. Another, leaning against the far wall, massaged his neck, whilst close to the table an orcish-looking fellow nodded to himself and started to pack away the cards. "Is hunting devils a normal pastime for the captain of a smuggler's ship?" Rastin asked. The dwarf looked at him for a long moment, and then, all of a sudden, burst out into laughter, his shoulders jogging up and down as his face creased in his revelry. He wiped a tear from his eye. "Why no, Master Gnome. I don't believe it is." There was this strange expression on his face. It looked almost like pride. "So you're telling me she's a what?" Kroleg yelled at the cowering Seyrat D. Having fled the Mountain Heart Tavern in a cart he had arranged for via some of his old business partners, the driver had taken them to an empty holding that was awaiting resale in the lower parts of the underground city. It was a poorer area, and given the amount of noise Angie had made when she started to wake up, Silden didn't doubt that soon the guards would be upon them. They needed to move again, and soon.
She would never really tell me much about it, but I believe some variant of lycanthrope. Please, you need to let me go and speak to her.
Krulek braced himself as the she-devil slammed herself into the doorway once more. He could hear her slavering jaws gnashing and growling, even on the other side of the heavy frame.
"You bastard! Open this door! We don't have time!" came the she-beast's voice, distorted and twisted by her elongated mouth.
"You should probably listen to her," said Dogan, nervously.
"By the hells I will," came the captain's reply. He couldn't believe he had been so careless as to let this long-eared thing follow him. He was so light that in the rush to the cart, Krulek hadn't even noticed the creature had grasped a hold of his prosthetic leg.
"No, really, she knows a lot about monsters. I believe her family—"
"Shut up, Dogan!"
came a monstrous voice from the other side of the door.
"Oh, bleeded say who needs to shut up here!"
Krulek banged his fist against the door. "Now one of you tell me who it is who's bringing these devils. If it ain't that Ezradis, then who? Why? And are you sure she ain't Hellspawn?" The frightened Seyrat nodded fervently.
"Nope, I mean, yes, she isn't Hellspawn. Just your average run-of-the-mill monster."
There was another push against the door, and the sound of claws tearing at the woodwork. Krulek's eyes started searching the room for anything he could use to hold her back after she broke through. But the room was empty. Only a few knickknacks remained, too inconsequential to be taken by the holding's former inhabitants. "Listen here, you, whatever you are. My crew are currently sitting ducks in the harbour waiting for your mistress to send the force of the Ruddy Mountain down to gut the lot of them. I've got promises to keep. If it ain't about us, who amongst her ilk would turn against your king?" Krulek didn't wait for the response. The beast's claws would make their way through the door at any moment. Reaching down, he undid the latch beneath his knee and threw himself onto the floor. A second later, Angie broke through and came hurtling towards him, wolf-like jaws opened wide. With a swift blow, Krulek had knocked her claws to the side while the other hand pushed his detached prosthetic between her teeth, forcing her jaw to stay open. Kicking his stump off the floor, he swung his leg over to try and pin the beast. Keeping pressure on her arms, he took a look at the animal. The strange eyes now made sense, set as they were in the wolf-like skull. All of her limbs were elongated, yet stronger. He could see tight sinews straining to be free of his weight. Was this really someone he was supposed to be looking for? Dogan ran to Angie's side. "Angie, I need you to focus. Think. Where are you, Angie?" The small creature was on his hands and knees before his friend, speaking as close as he dared to her ears. She twisted her head, spasming left and right to break free of the artificial limb. Dogan looked at Krulek with a pleading look on his face. "If she bites me, I'll use you to block her jaws instead," threatened the captain. Dogan looked into Angie's frantic eyes for a long moment. "She'll be fine," the Seyrat promised. Wrenching her head to the side, Silden pulled his leg out of her mouth to hold above him like a club. The wolf's jaws slathered and snapped as she recovered from the force. "I could still smell it on him," came her inhuman voice. "The taste of iron, the ash, by the goddess, the scent." Her voice faded into a whimper before she began thrashing once more. Dogan came closer and clasped his small hands against her head. "The scent? Do you think you could find it again, Angie? Do you think you could hunt with it?" "You are not seriously suggesting we walk through Gren using a werewolf as a sniffer dog?" Krulek interjected. This didn't sound like it was going anywhere good. "To give instructions, demands, the devil must be summoned to receive commands," came the beast's voice again. "And how do you know that?" Silden was still not ready for this. "She knows, okay? Do you have a better idea?" Dogan was looking at Silden now, rising to his feet.
You drove it off once before, yes? If we find the summoning site, we find the culprit. If you find the devil and you kill it for good, then your crew can leave safely. Do you understand?
Krulek leant an arm against Angie's throat. His weight started to choke her.
He leaned over the flailing beast and looked Dogan dead in the eye.
If you're lying to me, I will entreat Emnos to return from my grave and ruin the lives of you, her, and everybody else you've ever cared about in this cursed port, he growled.
That isn't a long list, replied Dogan, meeting his gaze with all the bravery he could muster.
Oh, and if we get out of this, you're both joining my crew, non-negotiable, Silden continued.
The small figure was taken aback. This was completely out of the blue. But before he had time to react, the captain had shifted his weight and fallen back on his arse, unable to stand before he reaffixed his limb. Angie was on her feet in seconds, a blur of dark fur and long limbs snapping round till she stood on both rear paws. Hunched over, with her hackles standing up on the back of her head and neck, she growled and snapped towards the captain, who still had his false leg raised as a club above him.
Well then, be a good girl. Find the devils and I'll give you a biscuit, said Krulek in a low, steady voice.
He was staring at the creature that was Angie with a tightly controlled expression. The beast moved in close and sniffed the air around the man with lips curled back in disgust. Then she leaned back and howled with an energy that reverberated around the chamber. Turning her back, she lowered herself onto all fours and threw herself through the doorway leading to the street outside.
"We'd better follow, fast,"
said Dogan, running to the doorway to watch his friend push past a dwarven couple who fled screaming. The captain was hastily closing the latch that would reattach his leg.
"Then climb on, stowaway," he grunted.
Rising to his feet, he didn't wait for Dogan to answer. He strode to the doorway and grabbed the Seyrad by the collar, throwing him onto his back as he walked out into the street.